It began with a whisper carried on the hot winds of Slaver's Bay, a rumor half-dreamed and oft-dismissed, of a forgotten branch of House Targaryen hidden across the narrow sea. Generations had passed since the dragons last roared in Essos, and most believed the line of the Dragon Lords existed only in the scattered remnants of Westeros. Daenerys Stormborn, Rhaegar's tragic story, Viserys' ill fate. Yet in certain corners of Essos, behind dusty tomes and among the silent spires of old palaces, threads of Targaryen silver hair flickered in half-light, a secret so fiercely guarded that those who knew dared not speak it aloud. Far to the north, Jon Snow knew nothing of this. He had seen the fate of the realm hang by a thread beyond the wall, battled nightmares made flesh, and found himself declared king in the north by his peers. That reverence had weighed on him like a lead cloak, for he felt more comfortable wielding a sword than donning a crown. Duty had always been his watchword. Once, that duty had been the night's watch. Now, a more tangled destiny bound him to the living, to all of Westeros, and to his newly discovered heritage. The truth that lived in his very blood. His dark curls and gray eyes hid a lineage no one had truly suspected, part wolf, part dragon. The legacy of Rhaegar Targaryen through Lyanna Stark. It was under a bruised sky late one autumn that the first real talk of a hidden Targaryen princess reached Westeros. Ravens bearing cryptic messages arrived at Winterfell. The northern lords, weary of war, tried to dismiss the rumors as false. Lady Sansa Stark read each letter with suspicious eyes, presuming it the machination of some petty pretender seeking a throne drenched in blood. Arya watched her sister read the letters, saying little, gleaning more with each quiet second. Bran, sullen and withdrawn in his new duties as the three-eyed raven, occasionally muttered half-prophecies. Ghost, Jon's white direwolf, prowled the corridors with restless energy, as if sensing a change in the air. Jon, returning from a training yard session with the new recruits who guarded Winterfell, arrived at the Great Hall to find Sansa pacing. She wore a fur-lined gown, her red hair braided into a crown around her head, a subtle echo of the mother she lost. "There's a rumor," she said, thrusting a parchment at him. "Another Targaryen beyond the sea. They say she has silver hair and violet eyes. Her name is rumored to be Meleys, though others claim it is Varella. No one can agree on her real identity. She's said to ride a black horse with flames on its saddle, or so the tales claim. Some say she was fathered by Rhaegar himself, others by another unknown Targaryen line. Many claims, no proof." Jon glanced at the parchment, his brow furrowed. Another Targaryen would complicate everything. He tried not to think of his own claim, one he had never sought. "What do we know?" Arya snorted softly from the corner, arms folded over her chest. "We know it's a rumor that can sow chaos. People love a Targaryen pretender." Sansa gave a small shake of her head. "True, but some rumors are worth investigating. There's a merchant in White Harbor who claims to have seen her with his own eyes in Volantis. White hair, tinted purple eyes, like lilacs in bloom. And the story goes she has the favor of old friends of Daenerys." Jon closed his eyes. Memories of Daenerys's final days haunted him. Her turn toward destruction, the scorching of King's Landing, and the terrible choice he had made. "Her friends," he repeated. "They still exist?" "Scattered," Sansa said. "You recall there were some who believed in Daenerys's cause despite everything. If this truly is a Targaryen with the old blood and the old looks, she could gather a following. We need to know what she wants." Jon handed the parchment back to Sansa. "We don't need another war. The people have barely recovered from the last. If she comes, or if she's real, we need to be ready to speak with her before anyone else. If there's any possibility of peaceful resolution, well, you know I'll try." Sansa nodded. Arya rolled her eyes in mild exasperation at Jon's unrelenting sense of duty, but she said nothing further. The conversation was left to drift amid unspoken concerns. Far across the narrow sea in Volantis, beneath the shadow of the black walls, a young woman dismounted from a slender mare as dark as midnight. Her cloak of gray and white silk concealed the color of her hair, though a few pale strands escaped the hood, glinting in the sunlight. On the docks, slaves scuttled out of her way, eyeing her with the mixture of fear and reverence so often reserved for rumored Valyrians. She turned a wary gaze on the passing crowds, pit fighters, red priests, merchants shouting about their wares. Her accent, a careful blend of Essos tongues, was shaped over many years, ensuring none could place her easily. Her name, which she kept hidden from most, was Meleys Targaryen. Raised in secret by a small retinue of loyalists, men and women who had once served House Targaryen during its years of exile, she had spent much of her life learning how to be invisible. Once, her nurse had whispered that her mother was a woman of uncertain parentage, who traced her lineage back to an exiled Targaryen mistress. Others suggested something more direct, that Meleys was the last living child of the Mad King's brood, or of Rhaegar's ephemeral liaisons. Yet none could confirm it fully. Her entire identity had been a tapestry of half-truths. Yet her appearance served as its own claim. Pale silvery blonde hair, eyes that were a pale shade of violet. She saw how heads turned. She would move, as always, to quickly hide that hair beneath a hood. She trusted few. In quiet corners, her confidants whispered that the throne of Westeros might yet be hers, if she dared to cross the sea and claim it. But Meleys had read the stories of blood and madness. She had heard how Daenerys, the purported last Targaryen, had tried to break the wheel and ended in devastation. She knew not what to believe, only that her guardians had taught her she possessed a birthright she had never asked for. That day in Volantis, she was guided to a small temple of the Lord of Light. The red priests there eyed her with discomfort. Some of them had once followed Daenerys. Others suspected her Targaryen lineage. She asked them for no worship, only for guidance on rumors from the west. The White Wolf, king in the north, who was himself said to be part Targaryen. She spoke quietly in their secret chambers, voicing her curiosity. "Jon Snow," said a gruff red priest, a scar twisting his dark features. "The bastard of Winterfell, though they say he is no bastard. The prophecies swirling around him have been inconsistent. He's the slayer of the Night King, or so some claim. He once traveled with Daenerys Targaryen. He was her lover or her ally, depending on who tells the tale." The man's voice echoed in the halls, where embers glowed in braziers carved like flaming hearts. Meleys listened, heart pounding at each mention of Daenerys' name. She thought back to all the times she had heard that name whispered in old Essos taverns. Khaleesi of the Dothraki, breaker of chains, mother of dragons. And in the end, the tragedy of King's Landing. The new Targaryen princess, if indeed she was that, felt no desire to replicate the path that led to so much destruction. But in Jon Snow, she heard of a man who carried that Targaryen blood yet fought for the realm, not for glory. She asked about him, gleaning details from the red priests who had once observed Daenerys' campaign from afar. "He is said to be honorable," another priestess offered, her voice lower, more measured. "A man who placed love and duty in constant conflict. He knew how to kneel, how to yield, yet also how to stand proud. He never sought to seize a throne but ended up with power all the same." Meleys pondered. For years, she had harbored a question she dared not voice. If she truly was a Targaryen, was it her fate to rule? Or was that a delusion forced upon her by those who saw her as a relic of a dying dynasty? She left the temple more uncertain than before, but each rumor of Jon Snow kindled a small ember of curiosity in her heart. So it was decided, in the hush of that evening, she would journey west, across the sea, to see what fate might greet her. Not to raise armies or brandish a claim she was not sure she possessed, but to find this man whose story seemed an echo of her own. Half-known and burdened by a destiny neither had chosen. Autumn shadows lengthened across the walls of Winterfell when Meleys Targaryen, traveling incognito with her loyal retinue, stepped foot on Westerosi soil at White Harbor. She had parted with her horse and her anonymity as best she could. The local lords and sailors had never seen her like. Some wondered if she was Lyseni or a fortune-teller from Ass High. Her hair she dyed for the journey, turning its silvery hue to a dull brown with pungent Essos dyes so that she would pass unnoticed. But the closer she came to Winterfell, the heavier her heart grew. What if the man she sought refused to see her? What if he sought her death, fearing her claim? The stories from the War of the Five Kings were fresh enough. Targaryens and Starks had rarely found peace, except in the secret union that birthed Jon Snow himself. She traveled under the name Maely Rivers, claiming to be a merchant's daughter. 2 loyal companions flanked her. Bran, a grizzled swordsman with Essos tattoos running down his left arm, and Lenora, who had been Maely's confidant since childhood. They moved slowly, not wanting to draw attention, creeping north along the King's Road under falling leaves of gold and orange. Each village they passed told new stories of Jon Snow's feats, of the day the Night King fell, of the heartbreak in King's Landing. Whispers abounded that the king in the north was more comfortable in the field than in a grand hall. He had no queen, the villagers said. Some rumored he had left behind a lover to kill Daenerys Targaryen, but no one could speak with certainty. The group approached Winterfell just as the first snowfall dusted the courtyard. Guards greeted them with cautious courtesy. The seat of House Stark was not open to every traveler, but the presence of a well-dressed retinue and the gold in Baron's purse eased their passage. Arrangements were made for them to lodge in a small but comfortable corner of the castle while they awaited an audience with the king in the north. Maelys, stepping onto the snow-laden stones of the courtyard, felt a surge of mingled awe and apprehension. This was the ancient seat of House Stark, those old kings who had known only winter and honor. The warm breath of stable horses rose in clouds. The ring of metal from the forge sang in the crisp air. Men and women rushed about their tasks, cloaks drawn tight against the cold. A direwolf banner fluttered in the wind, gray on white, a silent reminder of whose domain this was. It was not until the third day that Maelys was finally granted a meeting with Jon Snow. By then, she had glimpsed him at a distance. A tall, broad-shouldered figure in black and gray, hair dark as a raven's wing, sometimes walking with a massive white direwolf at his side. She had felt an inexplicable flutter in her chest each time. Perhaps it was the knowledge that, if the rumors spoke true, they were both Targaryens in some measure. Beings of ice and fire, outsiders in a world that demanded fealty to ancient houses. When she entered the great hall for her formal audience, she found Jon Snow seated on the dais. He wore simple northern attire, a fur cloak over leathers, the Stark sigil emblazoned discreetly. At his side stood Lady Sansa, regal in her posture, and to her left, Arya, whose enigmatic gaze followed every movement with quiet intensity. Bran was absent, preferring his solitude in the Weirwood Grove, or so the rumors said. Jon looked up at the newcomer, curious but also guarded. "You requested an audience. You claim to be a merchant's daughter from White Harbor, here to discuss trade." He spared her a polite nod. "I've read the letter you submitted. You wish for trade routes to Essos." Maelys swallowed, feeling her heart thunder. She had written that letter to secure the meeting. Half-truths. She took a breath. "Yes, your grace," she replied, her voice soft but carrying a faint accent that was not quite Westerosi, not quite Essosi. "I hail from Volantis, where my father had mercantile dealings. I hope to open new lines, especially for spices, silks, and certain crafts that might appeal to the north." Jon studied her a moment. Ghost, the white direwolf, prowled at the base of the dais, sniffing the air in her direction. "And what is your name?" "Maely Rivers," she lied smoothly. She hated the deception, but fear compelled her. "My father was from the Riverlands originally. He traveled to Essos when he was young." Sansa exchanged a glance with Arya, and Jon lifted his head slightly. "Your father's name?" In that moment, Maelys realized she was caught in a tight spot. She had prepared for many questions, but Jon's penetrating gaze made her doubt every lie. "Matt Hose," she said as calmly as she could. "Matt Hose Rivers. He passed many years ago." It was Arya who spoke next, stepping forward with a slight tilt of her head. "Your accent is not Riverlander, nor is it purely Essosi. Why is that?" Maelys managed a faint, apologetic smile. "I traveled widely. My nurse was Pentoshi, and I stayed in Bravos for 2 years. That shapes a tongue, my lady." Arya glanced to Sansa, who said nothing but watched carefully. Jon, after a moment, nodded. "I see. And your reason for being here, specifically at Winterfell, is to petition the king in the north for more official trade routes." "Yes," Meleys answered, feeling her palms grow slick with sweat. "Yet I have other reasons as well. I have heard rumors of a Targaryen lineage. Your grace, are rumored to be of that blood. I thought perhaps there might be cause to speak more privately." A hush fell. Sansa's eyebrows lifted. Jon's face hardened. "Targaryen blood," he repeated. His expression grew wary, even painful. "Those rumors are not topics for open discussion." "Then perhaps a private discussion," Meleys said, willing her voice not to tremble. "If my presence offends, I will leave. But I traveled very far to speak of this. And I come not to claim anything, only to—" She halted. The words threatened to spill out unbidden. "I too might be Targaryen." Ghost padded closer, sniffing at the hem of her cloak. She stood very still, letting the direwolf investigate. His eyes glowed red as embers. If the beast scented her fear, he did not lash out. Instead, he turned and silently trotted back to Jon's side, as if returning a verdict only Ghost understood. Jon gave the faintest nod. "Very well," he said, beckoning to an attendant. "Show Mistress Rivers to the Solar. I will speak with her presently." Sansa frowned slightly, but said nothing. Arya's stare followed Meleys as she left, yet no one voiced protest. Meleys felt a curious swirl of dread and relief flood her. Soon she would speak the truth. The Solar was warm, a crackling fire in the hearth, and shelves lined with old ledgers, genealogical records of northern houses, and maps. Meleys stood with her back to a wooden table, arms crossed, glancing nervously at the flickering shadows. Her heart pounded, for she knew what she must do. This was the precipice she had come to. The door opened and Jon Snow entered. He closed it gently behind him, his expression guarded. "We are alone now," he said. "No watchers, no earls with curious ears. Speak plainly." The quiet authority in his voice sent a tremor through her. She raised her hand to remove the hood from her cloak. The dye had started to fade at the roots, revealing strands of pale silver near her scalp. She hesitated, then ran a hand through her hair, ruffling it so the brittle dye flaked away in places. It revealed more of its true hue. The color was unmistakable silver gold, a Targaryen hallmark. Jon's eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked as if he had seen a ghost. He said nothing, waiting. Meleys' voice trembled. "I am called Meleys. My guardians whispered that I was Targaryen in blood, though I spent my whole life hidden in Essos. Perhaps it's a lie. Perhaps it's truth. I have no proof beyond the color of my hair and eyes, and the lineage stories my caretakers told me. I do not come here to seize the throne or to rally armies. I want only to know if there is a place for me in Westeros, a place where I might belong." Jon exhaled, stepping forward to look at her more closely. He studied her features. The pale brow, the shape of her nose, the tilt of her chin. She could see the flicker of recognition, as if in her face he found echoes of Daenerys, of Viserys, even perhaps of Rhaegar. "They said Daenerys was the last," he murmured. "Yet you stand here. If this is a deception, it's a bold one. And if it's truth—" He let the sentence hang. She spread her hands. "I do not claim your throne. I do not claim your power. If I wanted to march armies, I would have sought alliances in the Golden Company or Volantis. But I came alone with only a handful of loyalists." Jon let out a slow breath. "Why tell me? Because you are also Targaryen, and Stark. Because you understand the heavy burden of a destiny you never sought. And because—" She faltered, searching for the right words. "I heard you loved Daenerys once. I thought, perhaps you might show me kindness." His face darkened slightly at the mention of Daenerys, but he did not move away. "Kindness," he repeated. His tone grew distant. "There was a time when I believed that love was enough. Perhaps I was a fool. but I have never wished ill on an innocent soul. You say you want a place to belong. You could have found that across the sea." Meleys released a tremulous sigh. "All my life, I felt like a stranger, a curiosity, overshadowed by the memory of the dragons. I do not belong in Essos. My keepers spoke of the 7 kingdoms as the home of my ancestors. I had to see it, and now I stand here, telling a man I barely know the greatest secret of my life." She forced a wry smile. "If you mean to expose me, I only beg you do so gently." Silence stretched between them, thick as the walls of the solar. Jon studied her with an air of conflicted sympathy. At length he asked, "Have you told anyone else this secret here? Any of my bannermen, or the lords of White Harbor?" She shook her head. "Only you." Jon closed his eyes. "Then let it stay with me for now. The realm has known enough turmoil. You must understand, if word spreads that another Targaryen lives, many will see you as a threat. The Lannisters, the Baratheon remnants, the southern lords, even some of my northern allies might cry for your head, remembering the scars left by dragons. We must proceed with care." A wave of relief and gratitude washed over Meleys. "I thank you. I know I ask much." Jon took a step back, glancing toward the fire. "If you are truly Targaryen, you should speak with my brother Bran. He has a gift. He sees things beyond normal sight. He might confirm your lineage or disprove it. Are you willing to submit to that?" She hesitated, for she had heard of strange powers among the Starks, skin-changing, green-seeing. But she nodded. "I will do whatever is required to prove I pose no threat." "Then so be it," Jon said. He paused, looking at her with a gentler gaze. "You must remain in Winterfell until we are certain. Sansa will likely want to question you. Arya as well. I'll keep your secret as best I can. But I can't promise how this will end." Meleys bowed her head. "I understand." Jon lingered a moment longer, as if searching her face for something. Then he turned and left quietly, leaving her alone with the crackle of the fire, her secrets, and the uncertain future that lay before her. In the week that followed, Winterfell's halls seemed both stifling and strangely comforting to Meleys. She found unexpected solace in the old stone corridors and the roaring fires. Having grown up in warmer lands, she relished the novelty of gentle snowfall each morning. She also observed the men and women of the north with a mixture of awe and caution, uncertain what place she might carve for herself if her identity became widely known. It amazed her how loyal they remained to Jon, and how that loyalty sprang from respect rather than fear. She did not see much of Jon. He was busy overseeing defenses and training, ensuring the north was secure against any new threat. But once, she spied him practicing in the courtyard with men of the guard, sparring with a sword that seemed an extension of his very arm. He moved with swift grace, as if each strike was a prayer. It reminded her, with a pang, of the stories she had heard of Rhaegar Targaryen, though she had no real memory of that man beyond rumor. She wondered if the prince had been as graceful, and if any piece of that princely blood beat in her own veins. Instead, it was Sansa who summoned her. Meleys walked into the Lady of Winterfell Solar, where a tapestry depicting a snowy forest hung on one wall. Sansa sat behind a table, hands folded. Her red hair gleamed in the late morning light. "Mistress Rivers," Sansa said, voice cordial but cool. "I've been told you're to remain as a guest for some time. My brother believes you have a unique perspective on trade across the sea." Meleys inclined her head. "Yes, Lady Sansa. I'm happy to share what I know." Sansa's eyes flickered, betraying curiosity. "I understand you traveled extensively in Essos. You speak with an accent that isn't quite Braavosi or Valentine. You've seen more of the world than most in this court. Perhaps you can advise me on something. If we were to bring new wares to the north, what might appeal the most?" She launched into a series of pointed questions about commerce, markets, shipping routes. Meleys answered carefully and knowledgeably, for she indeed had traveled enough to gather a wealth of practical information. But she sensed behind Sansa's words there lay a deeper inspection, a testing of her character. Sansa watched her with calculating intelligence. In that moment, Meleys realized that Lady Sansa was, in many ways, the true seat of power here, discerning, poised, and formidable. She also understood that if Sansa came to suspect her true identity, it might be Sansa's decision that would seal her fate or spare it. At the end of the conversation, Sansa offered a slight smile. "You've given me much to think about. I appreciate your honesty, Meleys." The usage of her first name, with no courtesy title, felt both casual and pointed. "I hope you find Winterfell comfortable. My steward will ensure you have everything you need." Meleys bowed. "Thank you, my lady." As she turned to leave, she heard Sansa's final words. "And if you need anything, we are not cruel here. Our hospitality stands, so long as our trust is well placed." Meleys paused at the door, feeling a prickle on the back of her neck. "I understand," she said, and then she left. The day Meleys finally met Bran Stark was cold and gray, with a wind that swept bitterly across the courtyard. She had been summoned to the godswood, a place of quiet worship, where an ancient weirwood tree spread its carved face in stoic observation over a small pool. Snow clung to red leaves, creating a stark tapestry of color. She stepped carefully across the frozen ground, her breath steaming in front of her. There, beneath the pale boughs, Bran sat in a wheeled chair, eyes distant. Jon stood at Bran's side, while Arya lingered a step behind, silent as a shadow. Meleys felt the weight of their gazes, though Bran seemed to be staring beyond her at something unseen. Jon cleared his throat. "Bran, this is Meleys. She would speak with you." Bran's gaze slowly focused. He looked at her with unsettling calm. "I know," he said softly. "I've been expecting her." Meleys hesitated, unsure how to address him. "My lord," she finally managed. Bran shook his head. "I'm not a lord. Not anymore. Come closer." She approached, feeling an odd sense of displacement, as though stepping into a dream. The face in the weirwood tree seemed to watch with carved, red-eyed intensity. The faint rustle of branches overhead played like a distant whisper of souls. Bran's fingers lay still in his lap, but she sensed a quiet power in him, a power that dwarfed any courtly station. "You want to know if you have the blood of the dragon," Bran said. It was not a question. "You want the truth about your lineage." Meleys felt her throat constrict. "Yes, I fear the blood is real, but also fear it might be madness. My keepers told me I was Targaryen by birth, but I have only their word and my appearance. Please, if you can see the truth, I beg you to share it." Jon watched them, arms folded, tension in his shoulders. Arya's expression was unreadable. Bran closed his eyes. The air around them seemed to still, as though the godswood held its breath. Meleys sensed something passing through him, a current of ancient memory or prophecy. Minutes stretched. Jon shifted his weight. Arya's gaze flickered between Bran and Meleys. Then Bran's eyes opened, and in them shone a trace of sorrow and acceptance. "They believed you were the daughter of Rhaegar's secret union, or perhaps another line. But the truth is more complicated. Your grandmother was Sheena Targaryen, a bastard daughter of Aegon V's youngest son, who fled across the sea decades ago, terrified of the purges that might follow the Mad King's death. Sheena eventually wed a Volantene Magister and bore a child, your father, who carried the Targaryen coloring but kept it hidden. You, Meleys, are a Targaryen in blood, though that branch is somewhat removed from the direct line. You carry the old blood, undeniably. Your father's line was loyal to your grandmother's memory, loyal to the idea of Targaryens restored. That is why you were raised as a Targaryen princess, hidden from the eyes of those who might see you as a threat." Tears pricked at Meleys' eyes. The name Sheena Targaryen was unfamiliar to her, but Bran spoke it with calm certainty. She felt a quiet weight settle in her chest, confirmation and relief. Then I am not some pretender. Yet I am also not the direct heir they once claimed I might be. "No," Bran said. "You do not outrank Daenerys or Rhaegar's line. You are a cousin of sorts, removed by a generation or two. The Targaryen claim you carry is genuine, but it is weaker than that of Jon or even Daenerys' memory. Yet you are Targaryen all the same. Jon's eyes flicked to Meleys. He knew that with this truth came a measure of danger. Even a distant Targaryen was enough to stir certain factions. Arya said nothing, but her stance relaxed, as though some tension had been resolved. You asked for truth, Bran continued. But you must be aware that others might not see the nuances of genealogical distance. Some might hail you as a Targaryen heir. Others would see you as a threat. It is up to you how you proceed. Meleys nodded, wiping at her eyes. I understand. Thank you. She fought to steady her voice. Is there any sign of madness in me? The stories of the Mad King? She trailed off, uncertain how to phrase the fear that gnawed at her. Bran's expression grew distant once more. Targaryen madness is not a certainty. You must choose your path just as Daenerys did. The future is not set. Only glimpses of possibility are shown to me. Be mindful of your heart, your desires, and your anger. That is the best counsel I can offer. She let out a shaky breath. Thank you. Jon placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. Thank you, Bran, he murmured, and Bran only inclined his head. The wind stirred the leaves of the weirwood, sending a spiral of red across the snow. Arya stepped forward, peering at Meleys. So, a distant cousin to Jon, she said, her tone quietly intense. Will you stay in Winterfell? Meleys looked from Arya to Jon. If you'll have me, I don't wish to cause trouble, but I have nowhere else to go. Jon nodded. We'll figure it out. Arya's lips twitched in the barest hint of a smile. Then welcome, cousin. Meleys felt a warmth spark in her chest, an odd, tenuous sense of belonging. She bowed her head, the swirling confusion of her life settling, at least for this moment. Even though she stood in the heart of a kingdom that might consider her a foe if her identity was widely known, she felt a trickle of hope. She was not alone. The next few weeks became a quiet routine of subtle integration. At Jon's behest, Meleys was introduced to the northern court as a trader from Essos with a particular knowledge of ships, goods, and alliances, earning her a place among the advisors who discussed commerce. Under Sansa's watchful eye, she helped facilitate new trade routes to Volantis and Bravos, occasionally lending advice on the use of coin and negotiation. The northern lords found her uncommonly well-versed for a woman so young, but her mild demeanor and readiness to serve the Starks eased any suspicion. Behind closed doors, she spent more time with Jon, forging a fragile bond over shared confidences. He told her stories of growing up at Winterfell, of never knowing his mother's identity, of feeling like an outsider. She reciprocated with tales of hiding in Volantis, of practicing swordplay under the watch of Bran, so that she could defend herself if ever her secret drew danger. Their kinship, both part Targaryen, both shaped by secrets, bred an intimacy that neither had expected. They found solace in each other's presence. But even as the weeks passed peacefully, dark clouds loomed on the horizon of rumor. Reports trickled in from King's Landing that certain southern lords, uneasy about the future of the realm, whispered about Targaryen resurgence. Queen Cersei was long gone, but new power players jockeyed for influence. Gendry Baratheon, legitimized by royal decree, held Storm's End but did not press any claim to the Iron Throne, content to rebuild the Stormlands. Tyrion Lannister, it was said, served as hand to a small council seeking stability. Yet not all were content with the state of affairs, and the name Targaryen still held sway over hearts that yearned for old glories. One frigid morning, Samwell Tarly arrived at Winterfell, breathless from the long ride north. He carried scrolls from King's Landing, each describing the stirrings of tension. Over a hearty meal in the Great Hall, Sam explained to Jon the nature of the rumors. A Targaryen princess rumored to be in Westeros. Factions loyal to the memory of Daenerys might seek her out, rally behind her, and attempt to place her on the Iron Throne. Jon's gaze flicked to Meleys, who sat quietly at the long table. We had hoped to keep her existence hidden, Jon said with a sigh. Sam's eyes widened. She's truly Targaryen? He swiveled to look at Meleys, who met his gaze with a sheepish expression. Yes, Jon affirmed softly. But her lineage is more distant. She doesn't have a direct claim that overshadows any other. And she has no desire to start a war. Sam exhaled in relief. Thank the gods for that. But rumor rarely respects nuance. If the realm hears Targaryen, it leaps to old fears and loyalties. Sansa, seated at the head of the table, tapped her fingers on the wood. We must consider how to contain these rumors. If enough Southern lords believe there is a new Targaryen with a stronger claim, they could cause unrest or worse, try to use her as a puppet. Meleys, heart-pounding, spoke up. I want none of that. I never wanted to rule or to conquer. I only want to live freely without fear. Then we must find a solution, Sansa said gently. She glanced at Jon, her eyes flicking meaningfully. One that ensures neither the North nor the rest of Westeros sees you as a threat. It was Arya who cut in, voice quiet and precise. Political alliances are forged by blood and marriage. If she's truly Targaryen, and Jon as well, then a union might calm the lords who fear another dragon incursion. It might show solidarity. A Targaryen united with the king in the north, not poised against him. Silence fell like a hammer on the table. Meleys felt her cheeks flush hot. Jon's face went blank with surprise, and then his gaze flickered with 100 conflicted emotions. Marry her? He said, as though the words were foreign. That's quite a suggestion. Arya shrugged one shoulder, unperturbed. You wanted to unify the realm before, Jon, when you bent the knee to Daenerys. This time you have no queen. She has no standing. But if you wed, you combine claims. The lords can't rally behind a Targaryen princess if she's already in alliance with you. And it might help quell talk of war. Sansa steepled her fingers. It's bold. It would mean fully acknowledging her Targaryen lineage. But if we do that, we must also show that she is accepted and supported by the North. That acceptance might extend to the rest of Westeros. They would see it as a sign that the dragons and wolves are one house, one cause. Sam coughed. It's not an unprecedented notion. The Targaryens often married among themselves to keep the bloodline pure. And, well, considering how you two share a distant relation, it's not nearly as close as what the Targaryens of old used to do. But you should be aware of the optics. Jon ran a hand across his beard, a mixture of reluctance and confusion on his face. This is madness. We can't just decide a marriage is the solution. She hasn't even agreed. Nor have I. All eyes turned to Meleys. Her stomach churned at the suddenness of it all. Marry Jon Snow? A man she barely knew, yet felt a kinship with, a quiet pull. She swallowed, trying to steady her voice. I never dreamed of marriage as a political tool. But if it would keep the peace, she trailed off, uncertain. She risked a glance at Jon, searching his expression for disgust or pity, but found only perplexed consideration. Sansa intervened softly. No one is forcing either of you, but in my experience, the easiest path to unify the realm is to remove any excuse for factionalism. If the rumored Targaryen princess is happily allied in marriage to the king in the north, then no southern lord can pretend to champion her cause for war. At the same time, the north will see that Jon is not betraying his house by aligning with a Targaryen. Rather, he's bringing her into the Stark fold. Jon held Meleys' gaze. In that moment, unspoken thoughts passed between them. The sense of isolation, the inheritance of secrets, and a longing for acceptance. Perhaps they both recognized a reflection of themselves in the other. Meleys felt her heart pounding at the sheer magnitude of the proposal. She might escape the shadow of secrecy and stand openly as Targaryen, but only if she pledged her life to a man with his own scars. She spoke carefully. I would not object, if it truly helps keep the realm safe and spares me from being used or hunted. But I don't want it to be just a cold arrangement. You deserve more than that, my lord. Jon let out a long breath. A faint, half-smile touched his lips. I'm no lord, as I keep telling people. I never wanted a crown or a throne or another war. If this marriage spares us from war, that alone is worth considering. He paused, glancing at Arya, Sansa, Sam, then back to Meleys. We barely know each other. but we share a bond in blood and in circumstances. Perhaps that's a place to start. Meleys felt a subtle relief. Jon had not dismissed it outright. A swirl of emotion fluttered in her chest. She felt both terrified and strangely at peace. Sansa nodded firmly. Then we should make arrangements quietly. This must be managed carefully. We'll need to reveal your lineage at a moment that does not spark hysteria. But once it's official, once you are wed, the realm will see that the North and House Targaryen are one. Arya's gaze softened, a ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. We'll protect you both, she said, and in her quiet vow, Meleys sensed the fierce devotion of the wolf. No matter what the realm thinks. Thus began the delicate dance of preparing for a union that might reshape the Seven Kingdoms once more. News travels swiftly in Westeros, carried by ravens and rumors, but Sansa Stark proved canny in her approach. She reached out to key northern lords, explaining that the king in the north intended to marry a woman of unique heritage who had proven her loyalty. Some lords hesitated, wanting to know more. Yet Sansa, with unyielding grace, convinced them it would strengthen the North's position. She used trade deals, new coin, and the promise of stability to secure their cooperation, or at least their quiet acceptance. Meleys, for her part, felt a mixture of excitement and dread. On several occasions, she and Jon walked the walls of Winterfell together, speaking not of marriage negotiations, but of simpler things. The flight of ravens at dawn, the crispness of the winter wind, the memory of shared losses. He confided his struggles with leadership, how he still felt more at ease with a sword than a scepter. She admitted how stifling it was to be seen only as a living claim, rather than a person. In those moments, they forged something resembling friendship. Perhaps, she dared hope, the seeds of love. As the day of the ceremony approached, the skies darkened with winter clouds. The north was well into the chill months, and though winter had not fully returned to bury the land, the cold was undeniable. Inside Winterfell, halls were adorned with fresh rushes and candles. Lords and ladies arrived from across the north, some bringing humble gifts, others bearing only watchful eyes. A subtle hum of curiosity pervaded the castle. Who was this bride, so carefully cloistered? On the eve of the wedding, Meleys stood before a mirror in her chamber, untying the dyed pieces of her hair. She had ceased reapplying the dye, and now the silver had grown to reveal itself in full. Lenora, her loyal friend, combed through it gently. The reflection startled Meleys, for she looked every inch the Targaryen now, the shimmering pale hair framing a face made solemn by worry. She wore a simple gown of deep gray velvet with subtle silver embroidery, a gift from Sansa. The design was meant to be an understated blend of Stark and Targaryen. Gray for the wolf, silver for the dragon. No bright reds or golds, no flamboyant scales or heraldry, only a quiet melding of the two houses. Lenora's voice trembled with emotion. I never dreamed I'd see this day, my lady. To think we hid in Volantis all those years, worried you might be discovered and killed. Now you're to marry the king in the north, with half the realm's blessing. Meleys met her friend's eyes in the mirror, tears threatening. I'm afraid, she admitted. Afraid of the realm's reaction. Afraid of what marriage truly means. Jon is kind, but is that enough? Lenora wrapped her arms around Meleys' shoulders. From what I've seen, you two share a bond. It may blossom further. If the gods are kind, you'll find happiness in this union. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sansa peeked in, regal in a midnight blue gown lined with fur. May I speak with Meleys alone? She asked gently. Lenora curtsied and slipped out, leaving the two women facing each other. Sansa approached, looking at Meleys' reflection. You look lovely. Winterfell has not seen such a union in my lifetime. I wanted to make sure you're prepared for what comes next. Meleys turned to face her, hands clasped. As prepared as I can be, Lady Sansa. I appreciate all that you have done. Sansa's expression softened. This is not an easy path, but I remember how it felt to be used as a pawn once. I swore I would never subject another young woman to such a fate. If you wish to change your mind, even now, I'll help you find another way. That unexpected kindness brought tears to Meleys's eyes. Thank you, but I won't run. I choose this. If my existence can help bring peace, then I choose to stand beside Jon. Sansa nodded, a glimmer of approval in her gaze. Very well. Come. It's nearly time. The wedding took place in Winterfell's godswood, beneath the ancient weirwood tree. The heart tree's face watched impassively as a small gathering of northern lords, trusted friends, and a handful of retainers assembled. Snow drifted from an ashen sky, dusting cloaks and hair. Torches glowed in a ring around the clearing, their flames bright against the gloom of late afternoon. Jon stood at the base of the tree, Ghost at his side, wearing a cloak of charcoal gray wool trimmed with white fur. He watched, chest tight, as Meleys emerged from the far side of the clearing, arm in arm with Samwell Tarly, who, somewhat bashful, had offered to escort her in the absence of her own family. She looked every bit a Targaryen princess in that moment. Her hair, silver in the waning light, shimmered like spun moonlight. Her face was calm but carried a flicker of nerves in her eyes. The small crowd parted, letting her pass. Jon glimpsed Sansa standing off to one side, with Arya at her shoulder. Bran was not physically there but observed from a higher window, or perhaps through ravens perched in the weirwood's branches. Dignitaries from White Harbor, Barrowton, and other northern strongholds stood in silent witness. The hush was profound, broken only by the crackle of torches and the soft crunch of snow. She reached him, letting Sam's arm fall away gently. Jon offered her a slight, encouraging smile, which she returned with trembling lips. He realized his heart was pounding in a way it had not since his youth, since Ygritte and the stolen kisses in a cave beyond the wall. But this was different. This was not stolen nor forced. It was a deliberate choice. He found comfort in the steady determination in Meleys's eyes. They turned to face the godswood, the carved face that had watched over countless Starks. The old gods had no priests, only the quiet acceptance of a vow sworn before nature and ancient spirits. Sansa stepped forward to say the traditional words that a northern wedding might require. A brief invocation of the old gods, the binding of hands with a strip of leather. As she draped the binding around Jon and Meleys's wrists, a sharp wind lifted snow from the ground, swirling it around them in a ghostly dance. Before the old gods, we stand to witness the union of our king in the north, Jon Snow, and Meleys of House Targaryen. Here, Sansa paused, letting the words echo, the first public acknowledgement of Meleys's lineage. A ripple of surprise passed through some onlookers, but it was subdued. Sansa pressed on. Who binds herself to the north and to this man, that our houses and peoples might be joined in peace? Do you, Jon Snow, swear to protect and cherish her, to share her burdens and joys, from this day until your last day? Jon's breath misted before his face. I swear it. Sansa looked to Meleys. And do you, Meleys, swear to stand by Jon Snow, to uphold the peace of the realm, to share his burdens and joys, from this day until your last day? Meleys' voice was low but clear. I swear it. Sansa nodded, removing the binding. Then before the old gods, I pronounce you husband and wife. A soft murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Jon and Meleys turned to face each other, their hands still warm from the leather strip. Her violet eyes met his gray ones with a mixture of relief and wonder. They leaned in, softly pressing a chaste kiss to seal the vow. Applause and cheers, muted but genuine, rose among the northerners. Some wore uncertain expressions, but the power of the moment prevailed. The king in the north had taken a Targaryen to wife, forging a new link in the chain of Westerosi history. Ghost let out a quiet, approving whine, and the swirl of snow settled. In the aftermath, a modest feast was held in the great hall of Winterfell. The tables groaned with hearty northern fare, roast boar, stewed vegetables, hot crusty bread, and the fires blazed to ward off the night's chill. Lords and ladies mingled with the Winterfell guard, toasting the bride and groom. Jon sat at the high table beside Meleys, accepting cups of ale he barely drank, while she picked at her food with mingled excitement and nerves. They received well-wishers, including those who masked their uncertainty behind polite smiles. More genuine were the congratulations from their closest circle. Sansa's affectionate embrace, Arya's smirk and handshake, Sam's tearful blessings. The Northern lords who once questioned Jon's half-Targaryen heritage seemed at least mollified by the sense that House Stark remained in control, while the Targaryen bride brought trade and alliances. Some raised cups to the king and queen in the north, though Jon would later disclaim the latter title, preferring not to create illusions of monarchy beyond the region. Still, the shift was undeniable. Meleys was no longer an anonymous outsider. She was part of the ruling family of the north. Tormund Giantsbane, a late arrival, swept into the hall with raucous laughter, slapping Jon on the back until Jon nearly choked on his drink. "I leave the north for a few moons, and you've gone and found another dragon lady to wed?" Tormund boomed, echoing across the hall. "You must have a taste for that fire, Crow." Jon's cheeks reddened, but he managed a strained chuckle. "It's a bit different this time, Tormund." The big wildling winked at Meleys. "Long as you treat him well, lass. He's got a tender heart beneath all that brooding. And if he ever gives you trouble, just give him a good thump on the head." She returned a timid smile. "I'll keep it in mind." The feast continued into the night. Yet beneath the laughter and toasts, a current of unease lingered. This marriage had quelled immediate fears of a Targaryen threat, at least in the north. But what of the south, where the rumor mill churned and lords might bristle at the notion of a new Targaryen union? Jon and Meleys, weary from endless congratulations, finally retired to their chambers. The corridor was lit by flickering torches, the stones cold underfoot. At the threshold of the wedding chamber, they paused. Jon turned to her, his expression gentle. "You must be exhausted." Meleys nodded, her cheeks flushed, part from the warmth of the fires, part from the intensity of the day. "It was overwhelming, but I'm glad it's done. Now we can move forward, I hope." He pushed open the door, revealing a room lit by soft candlelight and warmed by a blazing hearth. The bed was strewn with fresh linens, embroidered with the Stark direwolf. She took a hesitant step inside. Tradition dictated certain intimacies on the wedding night, but they both carried ghosts of the past. He with Daenerys and Ygritte, she with a lifetime of secrecy and no knowledge of real intimacy. Jon closed the door behind them, turning to face her. His voice was quiet. "I don't want you to feel any pressure. This marriage was for peace, but that doesn't mean we can't find our own path. We can share this chamber, but if you wish to wait..." She reached for his hand, interlacing her fingers with his. "You are kind, Jon. I would like to try. Perhaps we can begin as friends, see if something deeper grows. Tonight, let's just share each other's company." He nodded, relief in his eyes. "Friends, then." They spoke softly by the fire, shedding the layers of formal attire, each revealing glimpses of vulnerability. He told her more of his youth, how he grew up always on the outside, overshadowed by the trueborn Stark children, though they loved him as a brother. She spoke of her lonely nights in Volantis, longing for a family she never knew, hearing only bedtime stories of Targaryen grandeur. Somewhere in the hush of that conversation, their hands found each other again, and a gentle kiss replaced words. By the time the candles guttered low, they lay together in quiet companionship, forging the first tentative steps of a bond that could heal old scars and shape new destinies. Word of the wedding, carefully curated, spread southward. Ravens carried messages that the king in the north had taken a bride of notable lineage from Essos, forging an alliance beneficial to trade and the stability of the realm. Yet rumors had a habit of magnifying details. Whispers reached King's Landing that Jon Snow's new wife might be a Targaryen. Some dismissed it as idle gossip, but others recalled how he had once bent the knee to Daenerys Targaryen. The leap to a second Targaryen union seemed plausible. As the snows deepened, envoys began arriving at Winterfell, seeking an audience. One represented Tyrion Lannister, Hand of the King's Council, who politely requested clarification on the bride's origins. Another came from Gendry Baratheon, offering congratulations but also pressing for a guarantee that any Targaryen claim would not threaten his own seat at Storm's End. A group of Dornish traders arrived, curious about renewing an alliance with the North if the rumors of Targaryen blood were true, for Dorne had once had deep ties to House Targaryen. In each case, Jon and Sansa navigated the diplomatic waters with care. Meleys was presented as a Targaryen of distant relation, no threat to any direct lines, married into House Stark for peace and prosperity. Letters were exchanged, reaffirming that the North had no designs on the Iron Throne. Slowly, the panic that might have sparked civil war subsided to cautious acceptance. Still, tension simmered beneath the surface. Some lords in the Westerlands or the Reach were not so easily convinced, viewing any Targaryen presence as a spark that could set the realm aflame. And in the midst of all this, Meleys found herself navigating the complexities of being a queen consort to the North, if not in name then in function. She listened to disputes among northern villages, advocated for increased trade with Essos, and accompanied Jon on visits to the outlying castles. At each turn, she saw the loyalty the Northerners bore him, and she strove to earn a measure of that trust for herself. Together, Jon and Meleys worked to integrate her knowledge of Essosi commerce with the North's needs. Grain was stockpiled more effectively, forging new shipping routes that would bring essential supplies to White Harbor from Bravos and Volantis, ensuring the North would not starve in harsh winters. The northern smallfolk, wary at first of her foreign accent and silver hair, began to see her as an unexpected boon. She was approachable, always ready to listen to their concerns. Jon, for his part, found in her an unexpected warmth. Their nights grew more comfortable, shifting from mere politeness to gentle affection. He found himself confiding secrets he had held for years, the pain of losing Daenerys, the burden of being the one to end her life. Meleys held him in her arms when he wrestled with guilt, whispering reassurances that her path would be different. She would not allow fear or ambition to consume her. In turn, he promised never to let her face the realm's suspicions alone. Slowly, a genuine love formed. It was not the tempestuous passion Jon once felt in the throes of war, nor the grand, fiery romance that accompanied Daenerys's dragons. It was quieter, like the gentle snowfall that blanketed Winterfell's battlements, a steady accumulation of trust, respect, and shared dreams. They learned each other's rhythms, found delight in stolen smiles and midnight conversations in front of the hearth. When Ghost nuzzled her hand, Jon felt a warmth he had thought lost forever. The realm took note, or at least the Watchers in King's Landing did. Reports came back of a king in the north and his Targaryen bride who seemed genuinely united, presenting a stable front to a weary kingdom. Murmurs of the couple's potential children, heirs who would carry both Stark and Targaryen blood, spread across taverns and courts. Some saw that as a blessing, a union of ice and fire that could quell old hatreds. Others saw it as a harbinger of the old Valyrian power stirring again. In the corners of the land, new conspiracies brewed, some eager to see a new Targaryen ascend, others determined to stamp out the line forever. But for now, in the cold halls of Winterfell, the abiding sense was one of cautious optimism. The nightmares of White Walkers and the chaos of Mad Queens had passed. A new generation might inherit a land less troubled by ancient feuds. Jon watched Meleys on the ramparts one morning, her pale hair caught in a shaft of winter sunlight, and felt the faint stirrings of hope for what lay ahead. That hope was tested when a summons arrived from King's Landing, sealed with the Lannister lion in gold wax. The letter invited, or rather commanded, Jon Snow and his wife Meleys Targaryen Stark to attend a grand council to discuss the future of Westeros, called by Tyrion Lannister and representatives from across the realm. Its tone was polite, the words carefully chosen, but the subtext was clear. The southern leaders wanted to see, with their own eyes, this new Targaryen princess who had slipped into the north, and to ascertain whether Jon still harbored any claim or ambition to the Iron Throne. Jon and Sansa pored over the letter in the Great Hall. Arya read it over their shoulders, shaking her head in thinly veiled irritation. "They want to put you on display, like a trained direwolf." Sansa's frown deepened. "It's a trap of sorts, not necessarily to kill you, but to force you into a public stance, deny any claim or risk war. If you refuse to come, they'll assume you're hiding something. Jon rubbed his temples. We can't ignore it. We must show them we mean no harm, or they'll stoke unrest. But I'm loath to subject Meleys to that den of vipers. Meleys approached, anxiety twisting her stomach. Whatever you decide, I'll stand by you. She'd heard the stories of King's Landing. The politics, the betrayals, the rubble left after Daenerys' final assault. The notion of stepping foot there as a Targaryen terrified her. Sansa sighed. If we do this, we must go prepared. Bring a retinue that demonstrates the North's strength, but not so large as to appear threatening. Carefully craft our statements. Prove that you two are content to remain in the North, that you pose no threat to the Iron Throne. Jon nodded. And pray it's enough. Arya's eyes narrowed. I'll come too. Someone needs to watch your backs. So the decision was made. They would travel south, forging a small but respectable party. Jon wrote replies, indicating their willingness to attend. They spent weeks in preparation, mustering a guard of loyal Northmen, gathering supplies for the long journey. Sansa remained behind to rule Winterfell in Jon's absence, keeping the North stable. Thus, on a gray morning, Jon Snow and Meleys Targaryen Stark departed Winterfell at the head of a column of horses, joined by Arya, Samwell Tarly, and a handful of trusted bannermen. The crisp northern air accompanied them as they rode through the gates, passing under the watchful eyes of guards. Meleys left with a swirl of emotions in her chest: fear, hope, curiosity about the seat of power where so much of her family's history had played out. As Winterfell's walls receded behind them, Jon placed a reassuring hand over hers. "We face this together," he murmured. She looked up at him, seeing the solemn determination etched into his features. She managed a small smile. "A dragon and a wolf, side by side," she whispered. "They won't know what to make of us." Jon allowed himself a rare grin. "Good," he said, spurring his horse onward. "Let them wonder." And so they rode south into a future that neither could fully predict, bound by vows and blood, forging a new chapter in the saga of ice and fire. The snows of the North swirled at their backs, and ahead lay the promise and peril of King's Landing, where the union of two distant claims might shape the fate of the realm once more.